eye visible.
The Holocaust and the disabled community. The Independent published that Bill Maher says Whoopi Goldberg's suspension for Holocaust comment is so insulting. And I totally agree with Maher's statement. It is not only insulting, but clearly discriminatory and racist to suspend Mrs. Goldberg for a lack of knowledge. This is important to point out because the fact that Whoopi Goldberg made a mistake and corrected herself should not be a good reason to cancel her. The act of dismissing a public figure should be thorough in a world where black women are rarely promoted. Hence, the media industry has a duty to treat people decently because thus far there are not that many black women on screen, nor black disabled women for that matter. The Holocaust and the disabled community. In order to understand why I found Mrs. Goldberg's dismissal outrageous, we need to take a look at the fact that after the Second World War, the world discovered that Jews were not the only victims of the Nazis. The disabled community suffered greatly as a consequence of the Nazis' determination to eliminate as many disabled people as possible too. The eugenic theory played its part in the justification of the killing of disabled people. Eugenic theory, which promoted the elimination of the disabled and those who was categorized as impure member of the German society, left the disabled community with a death toll of approximately 275,000 disabled people killed by the Nazis. Having said that, the mass killing of disabled people during the Holocaust had set a new tone for the protection of the disabled community in the UK. This is why disabled people in the UK campaigned successfully for the implementation of the 1944 Disability Employment Act, which promised sheltered employment, reserved occupations, and employment quotas for disabled people. In a bittersweet resolution, this gave birth to many changes that ease the way in which disabled people interact with their environment on an accessibility level in the UK. For example, architects and planners took on the idea of implementing a universal design regarding the fashion of new buildings to satisfy the need for a more inclusive environment. The consequences of people believing in the eugenic theory, however, were not confined to Europe only. For example, in the United States of America, a little understanding of disability led to vague generalization, labeling of syndromes from doctors, such as the Down or Williams syndromes, as well as autism or dementia, which were classified as debilitating without appropriate research about the best way to look after each individual's needs. In order to deal with the issue of disability as a whole, the government subsidized Fairview Institute. John F. Kennedy was convinced that parents would benefit from having some sort of medical support for their disabled children, and this happened in the 1950s, many years after the Second World War ended. Only a few people could access to what they thought was an innovative and adequate solution to create a better environment for disabled people. Children were sent to Fairview Institution but suffered from being separated from their family, which can be considered as emotional abuse. Many protocols were implemented that breach human rights, such as the forced sterilization of all Fairview's patients. Other more severe mistreatment resulted in death of children. Today, there are still many issues to be solved. tells us that there are over 1 billion people living with some form of disability worldwide. And disabled people still have so many challenges to overcome, from high unemployment to lack of access to adequate health care or racism and discrimination, to name a few. The Holocaust and other groups of people. The Nazis used the same stupid and inadequate arguments not just to exterminate the Jews but also against people of color and the travelers community. Indeed, traveling people were the second largest group slaughtered by the Nazis. There were Roma who stood up against the Nazis, but this is not shown in the media. As many as 35 million non Jews were killed by the Nazis in the course of the war, only to justify a fundamentally unproven and delusional ideology in order to rob, enslave, kill, and create fear in Europe and beyond. The BBC listed those who fought for Britain during World War II as the below. The British Empire and dominions raised a total of 8,586,000 men of military service. More than 5 million came from the British Isles. 1,440,500 hailed from India, while 136,000 came from South Africa. Of those who fought, 629,000 were Canadians. 413,000 came from Australia and 128,500 from New Zealand. More than 134,000 traveled from other colonies, including some 10,000 from the Caribbean. The organization World War II adds that the estimated casualties for Germany reach just under 7.4 million. For the Soviet soldiers, it was roughly around 8,700,000. For the British, it was 700,000 military casualties and 60,000 civilian deaths. The USSR estimated losses now stand at 26,600,000. Poland's death toll was between 5.6 and 5.8 million. The USA military dead is around 416,800 people. Casualties listed here includes about 4 to 12 million war-related famine deaths in China, Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and India that are often omitted from other compilations of World War II casualties. Finally, Être Républicain explains that there were an estimated 130,000 to 500,000 Roma who have been killed during the conflict, and perhaps even more according to some historians, and between 10,000 and 15,000 homosexuals died in the hands of the Nazis in the concentration camps. Although these are estimated numbers, it does not take into account the 440,000 Native Americans who served on all fronts in the conflict, and the soldiers from Senegal, Mali, Benin, Ivory Coast, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Saint-Pierre et Miquelon, Nouvelle-Calédonie, French Guiana, French Polynesia, etc. Hence, Mrs. Goldberg's statements were inaccurate, but not an act of support for Nazism. Also, does the Jewish community have any compassion for the others who died in horrible circumstances during the Second World War. You were not the only victims of the Holocaust, and that is an undeniable fact. This is why the view has lost me on this matter, and I wish that they could think about the consequences of their actions when it comes to racism and discrimination. Thanks for listening, Frederick. I Visible.